Welcome back. Now, before opening the discussion with our first keynote speaker, we'd like to make a couple of introductory remarks to delve deeper into the doctrinal concept of aerospace power as described in the strategic guidelines of the Air Force. Aerospace power is the ability to generate effects in the functional union of two distinct physical environments: air, in which Aeronautica Militare has a century-old experience, and space, where its astronauts and personnel have built unique competence through the last decades. These two contiguous environments have become domains thanks to technological developments. The same technological development is today providing the capabilities to operate throughout their full scope. Due to the progressive increase of actors, both private and governmental, and the evident needs related to rapid response, the two domains are today considered as an operational continuum. We refer to a physical space extended for hundreds of kilometers from the Earth's surface to space, in which the obvious reasons of physical contiguity, the speeds in play, and the reaction times do not allow for a separation of command and control responsibilities, nor excessive project fragmentation. Therefore, aerospace refers to everything concerning the functional union of the two domains, air and space, aimed at protecting a country's integrity and interest from threats that originate, cross, arrive, and operate in this continuum. The Air Force has domain competencies, technical, cultural, and historical, to operate in aerospace in its broadest and most complete meaning, which I just described. Now, this is the starting point, the basic assumptions for our today's discussions. However, one of the reasons we gather today here in Rome is to build on a culture and environment that encourages disruptive thinking instead of discouraging it. After all, as one of the panelists at the last 2023 ASPC said, our air forces were founded because of disruptive thinking. So nurturing a culture of invention and disruption will be vital if Italy and its allies are to employ aerospace power effectively in the defense of the free world. Throughout our time together, we are going to be challenged to whether or not we need to fundamentally rethink the operating paradigm that we're under. So in that spirit, I'll take a chance and get the ball rolling. Western military thinking agrees that air superiority is a key enabler to victory. Traditionally, air superiority has been understood as the ability of a nation's air force to conduct operations without prohibiting interference from opposing forces. This concept has been the foundation of military planning since the First World War, when controlling the skies became essential. However, as many of you are aware of, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, as well as the ongoing war in Ukraine, have forced a rethinking of the terms under which this air superiority can be achieved and maintained. So just as the advent of the aircraft revolutionized warfare a century ago, emerging technical and tactical advancements are dramatically reshaping the battle space, and achieving air supremacy not only comes with excessively high costs, but appears more and more unrealistic, especially in a near-peer fight. These doubts are backed up by the mobile nature of present-day ground-based air defense systems and the situational awareness provided by a truly integrated system of systems. Hasn't perhaps the time come to reconsider our assumptions and focus on building an air force that can always effectively sustain the fight, even when the skies are highly contested? Hasn't perhaps the time come to moving away from a full coverage mentality towards one that emphasizes war readiness and pragmatic defense? Addressing air superiority, General David W. Alwyn, the Chief of Staff of the US Air Force, recently said, "We need to understand that it can no longer be ubiquitous air supremacy for days and weeks on end. It has to be synchronized for the time and space and region of our choosing." This transformation underscores the necessity for a nuanced understanding of layered air superiority, a concept encompassing everything from drones and unmanned aerial vehicles to advanced anti-aircraft systems, from space-based assets to cyber capability. A concept that recognizes that air control is influenced by actions and capabilities across various domains, including land, sea, cyber, and space. And given we are talking about thinking beyond our operating paradigms and current understanding of traditional domains, let's take space for instance. It is an extension of the airspace environment that has already become a warfighting domain, as well as a platform for power projection. This applies both to allied, partner, and like-minded nations, and to our adversaries, who are massively investing in counter-space weapons, as well as taking advantage of the space domain to enhance their own lethality on Earth. For a much deeper insight on these issues, we asked one of the most experienced personalities in the world to share his thoughts with us. Please join me in welcoming the 4-star Chief of Space Operations of the United States Space Force, General Hans Saltzman.
Buongiorno. I'm not sure I can live up to that introduction, I promise. It is a real pleasure to be here with you at the 2nd International AeroSpace Power Conference. I often find that doing something a second time can be harder than just doing it once. It's a challenge to build on past success without the motivating force of novelty. But doing something twice transforms a good idea into a good habit, and it lays the foundation for building something enduring. It's the turning point between desire and destiny. So as the 2nd Chief of Space Operations, let me be the first to congratulate you on what I'm sure will be a very successful event with even more to come. To that end, I would like to extend a thank you to the team, everybody that helped me be here today, as well as General Portolano, Honorable Crosetto. I enjoyed the conversation this morning with them very much. The tremendous hospitality and their clear understanding of the importance of space is going to help develop the partnership we have with the great nation of Italy. We live in complex times, and the military depends on political authorities to set the policy and priorities that it must execute. So I thank them for their leadership on that. I also want to thank Lieutenant General Goretti for inviting me here. I've known Luca for some time now. It's a pleasure to work with a true visionary and forward thinker. His foresight is exactly the kind of thing we'll need to meet the challenges ahead. And finally, I want to thank everyone in attendance today for recognizing the aerospace dimension for what it is, the premier platform for military power projection in the modern era. But if you'll permit me, I'll focus my remarks on the space element of aerospace. After all, I am the service chief of the United States Space Force, and even if I did 30 years in the US Air Force before that. It might amuse you to hear that I still get in trouble for trying to use air metaphors when I talk about space. And believe me, I know that comparing satellite maneuvering to dogfighting is imprecise, but it is a good analogy, and it helps to frame things for people who aren't experts in space operations, and quite frankly, old habits die hard. It's never easy to change the way we think about things, but that doesn't mean that things won't change around us. Consider the space domain, for example. 100 years ago, space was a great unknown, a mysterious void with no real sense of size or scale. Sure, we knew it was bigger than the Earth, but how big? In 1920, there was even a so-called great debate. On the one side, there were astronomers who believed the universe was so small that it contained only a single galaxy. On the other hand were astronomers who argued that the galaxy was simply one of many. It wasn't until a meeting of the American Astronomical Society in 1925 that Edwin Hubble proved the existence of stars beyond the reach of the Milky Way. And that sounds obvious to us now, but at the time it completely upended our understanding of just how vast the universe really is. 50 years ago, the space race was just ending. In 1975, a joint US-Soviet mission saw an Apollo spacecraft dock with a Soyuz spacecraft in low Earth orbit to accomplish the first crewed international mission in space. This was an incredible achievement, and for many people, that handshake overhead signaled a thawing of the Cold War and the beginning of international partnerships in space. But the space domain itself still remains something of a curiosity, far out of reach, relevant to some people, relevant to some nations, but not necessarily its people. Today, things could not be different, more different. Space can still be out of sight and out of mind to most, but the domain has become interwoven into so much of our daily lives. Obviously, I'm sure you're aware of how much you rely on global positioning data to keep supply chains and logistics moving. But let's take that one step further to examine things being transported. Let's talk about food, one of the most basic human needs. Would it surprise you to learn that 1/3 of the crops worldwide are grown using data from space? As far back as 2006, satellite imaging of the slopes of Frascati recorded a record harvest of grapes just 30 kilometers from here. Today, the European Space Agency's Copernicus Sentinel-2 mission continues to support a steady flow of wine from Italian vineyards to a grateful world. Farmers around the world rely on satellites to inform their decision on planting, fertilizing, managing water. They track field developments, identify pests. Over time, long-term data sets provide insight into vegetation cover, soil properties, seasonal variation, even predicting things like droughts and floods. At the macro scale, this information can help nations mitigate food shortages, make decisions on trade, and be more efficient in the way they manage their people's food supply. This is far from the only way that satellites support our daily life, and we don't even see them on a day-to-day basis. Satellite telecommunications is one of the more mature applications of the space domain. For decades, we have depended on space to keep us connected to the ground. Today, most radio signals are distributed from central studios by satellite. When you watch news or sports program on television, even a local one, the broadcast likely passes through space before it reaches your screen. Much of the internet is held together by linking servers to a network core by satellite. And that connectivity is essential because satellites are also a major reason why we can't react so quickly to natural disasters and emergencies. When phone lines fail, the link between leaders and responders is broken, and precious time is lost. With satellites restoring those links, decision makers can monitor conditions on the ground as they evolve, and they can ensure effort is made where it is most needed. For example, in 2023, satellite imaging assessed the damage caused by flooding in the Emilia-Romagna region. It informed relief efforts and helped make sense of the aftermath. In so many ways, great and small, modern life is made possible by satellites overhead. So, is it any surprise then that our national security has also come to depend on them? In the same way that we have delegated increasing responsibility for space for civic activity, so too have we handed missions for terrestrial forces to orbital assets. Today I can tell you that modern military forces are built and sized around the assumption that space power will be there when needed. We can do more with less on the ground, at sea, or in the air precisely because we have offloaded so many of the traditional requirements to satellites on orbit. The fundamental difference between the military of 1985 and the military of 2020 is space power. It has expanded and enhanced almost every aspect of our operations. It has increasingly taken on its role as the fundamental enabler of power projection. Without space power, we can't mass and maneuver fires at the timing and tempo required for success on the modern battlefield. We can't flow the orders that command and control our troops. We can't gather intelligence, communicate information, or sustain our operations at scale. In other words, without satellites to support and integrate our combat power, we fight blindly and with one hand tied behind our back. Today I say with confidence that space is the backbone of our combined force. It is no longer a mystery or a curiosity. Now, the space domain is a vital national interest. It is a region with geography and terrain to contest and control. It is a warfighting domain as critical to the fight as the land, sea, or air. This is a significant change from the world many of us grew up in, but it is a change that we had better adapt to and quickly. Because let me assure you, as a student of history, wherever national interests are found, they are inevitably followed by competition, crisis, and conflict. Our advancement in space has given us an incredible strategic advantage, a force multiplier to exceed all others. But for any nation, an advantage can also become a vulnerability, something to attack today, because doing so cripples your enemy for tomorrow. We are not alone in recognizing the incredible platform that satellites offer for military power projection. There are many nations that have invested heavily in counter-space weapons, tools to deny, degrade, or destroy the satellites upon which we've come to rely. In 2007, as a much younger and better-looking lieutenant colonel, I stood on the ops floor at Vandenberg, then Air Force Base, and watched as China launched an anti-satellite missile and shattered one of its own weather satellites into tens of thousands of pieces of debris. These threats are not notional. They are real, they are present, and they are dangerous. That, unfortunately, is another change we have to accept. Space is no longer a sanctuary. Since that time, the threats have evolved and proliferated. Whether they deploy from the ground or operate in orbit, we have to contend with kinetic weapons, directed energy attacks, radio frequency interference. As recently as 2021, Russia demonstrated their own anti-satellite missile, affirming its willingness to threaten space for national objectives. And when I say counter-space weapons, I don't just mean threats to satellites. If you'll recall, one of the first strikes in Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a cyber attack against the Viasat ground station, denying access to the space data network. The objective was clear: deprive Ukraine of its command and control, crippling its ability to react effectively to the attack. I think that was a shadow of things to come. Step one in modern warfare will be to deny our adversary space power because it's so foundational to everything that follows. Today, space is deeply integrated into our combined force operations. The thing about a backbone is, you're hard-pressed to do anything without it. We can't train for a loss of our satellites. We can't win against a great power with a military reduced to a 1985 posture. We simply can't do without space power unless we're willing to accept appalling cost in terms of people and resources. There can be no such thing as a day without space, so we must be willing to fight for it. In essence, that's why the United States decided to establish a Space Force. The logic is straightforward. Space has become a vital national interest. It has also become a warfighting domain. Therefore, we decided to organize a dedicated military service to contest and control it. Simple as that. Domain superiority is a mission unique to military services. To achieve space superiority, we must ensure freedom of action of our forces while denying the same to our adversaries. We must protect combined space power while defending our combined force against space-enabled attack. This is the formative purpose of the Space Force, and it requires purpose-built concepts, training, and equipment to generate space-minded warfighters. Fundamentally, this is no different from air superiority for the air domain or command of the sea for the maritime domain. Even if we rarely traverse it, space is nevertheless a physical region with geography and terrain. So why would we treat it any differently than we do the other domains? In fact, by virtue of its function, space superiority is the foundation for all other forms of domain superiority, a precursor for combined force success. With control of the space domain, you support and enable air superiority, which lays the groundwork for terrestrial and maritime operations. As a result, I firmly believe that while space superiority might not win the next war, we will certainly lose without it. There's just one problem, though. Space is big, metaphorically and literally. Even if you narrow your focus just to those orbits in the immediate vicinity of Earth, the space domain is large, complex, and complicated. More than that, space is inherently global. In low Earth orbit, a satellite will traverse the globe 16 times in 24 hours. In geostationary orbit, a single satellite can observe about a third of the Earth's surface in perpetuity. There are no local boundaries or borders. Simply by accessing space, you extend your reach many times over. Once a regional conflict extends into space, it becomes a worldwide problem. That's to say nothing of the debris issue. I told you that China tested its anti-satellite missile in 2007. Today, nearly 20 years later, we are still tracking 3,000 pieces of debris that resulted from that irresponsible choice. Russia's 2021 test compounded the problem. Several times a year, the Space Force helps the International Space Station avoid collision with those objects. And think about that for a second. One nation blows up its own satellite, but we all have to live with the consequences for decades to come. Open conflict in space could make the problem almost unmanageable. I've told you that people in the world over benefit from satellites, whether or not they know they do. We cannot allow the unreasonable actions of a few nations deny those benefits for generations to come. Almost by definition, we all must be stakeholders in the future of the space domain. So for nations that care about a safe, secure, sustainable use of space, how should we proceed? For me, that question starts and ends with one word: teamwork. Because it's so much bigger than any one of us, space demands that all of us work together. Space power is a team sport. I hope this isn't a surprise to you, but you can't win a football match with just a single player on the pitch, even if it is Donnarumma. You need a team working in concert, holding their shape, executing tactics with unity of effort. So if we're going to succeed as a team, then we had better act like one. And during my tenure as the Chief of Space Operations, I have heavily prioritized working with allies and partners to advance our shared interests in space. When I was appointed to the role, I announced that one of my 3 primary lines of effort was to partner to win, this idea that victory and collaboration must be synonymous when it comes to our domain. Time and again, I have spoken to civil and military leaders around the world about the importance of integration in space. Last October, I spoke to the NATO Military Committee about the importance of recognizing space as a warfighting domain. But talk alone is cheap. Just last month at the United States' 40th Space Symposium, I announced the imminent release of the Space Force's International Partnership Strategy, which provides a blueprint for multinational collaboration. Afterwards, I hosted an International Space Chiefs Forum, as well as the Principals Board for the Combined Space Operations Initiative, both with the objective of aligning actions with words. In every instance, I looked to Italy as a friend and a partner, as I do now. That's why I'm here today. Obviously, your excellent food and wine makes this an easy invitation to accept, but I'm here because I want to advance the partnership in space between our 2 nations. I firmly believe that we need to take advantage of the space expertise that resides in the Italian Air Force. I've seen it, I've benefited from it, and I need it now. Military services provide trained, equipped forces for operations. They cultivate, educate domain expertise, and therefore I'm calling for a service-to-service connection to further our space capabilities hand in hand with our partners. So with the International Partnership Strategy as a guide, I am pleased to share that we are working to develop a country action plan for space cooperation between the United States Space Force and the Italian Air Force. This will be a non-binding document, but a critically important one. It will provide a detailed framework for bilateral unity of effort, and it will mechanize the integration we both agree is so essential. This plan will establish a steering group to guide our 2 militaries as we create, integrate, and operate space capability for our collective benefit. It shares the burden between us for mutual gain, capitalize on our strengths, and mitigate our respective weaknesses. In simple terms, it makes our 2 nations stronger in space. Now, there is much work to go, but I'm excited for many things we are working into our plan. For example, last year I invited a British officer, Air Marshal Godfrey, to sit on my staff. To my knowledge, this is the first time a foreign officer has served at that level on a U.S. service headquarters staff. And it has been worth every obstacle that we had to break through to make it happen. Goddard provides a constant reminder that American planners and strategists must account for our allies and partners at every turn. And he has been invaluable at building ties between the U.S. Space Force and the Royal Air Force. I'd like to believe that the UK has benefited as much from this exchange as we have in the U.S. In the same vein, I hope to receive an Italian exchange officer to my staff, incorporating the voice of the Italian Air Force into our thinking from the outset. It seems like such a small thing, but you need to have a seat at the table if you want to be involved in the decision-making. Representation matters, and it cuts both ways. So I want to offer Italy a seat at the Space Force table, integrating the Italian Air Force into our force design from day one. Additionally, I expect the plan to call for combined training and exercises between our two services and those around. It's so important to train like you fight. Doing so early and often comprises the learning curve for military space operations, enhances our lethality, and optimizes our activities before they ever become necessary. If we can't work together in times of peace, we cannot expect success in times of crisis. How much better would it be to learn the hard lessons, build trust and familiarity, adapt to, synchronize with each other's capabilities well before a conflict erupts? It just makes sense. In the process, I expect the plan to specify greater information sharing, especially with regards to space domain awareness, missile warning and tracking, space-based sensing and targeting. Data is the lifeblood of decision-making. We have to talk, to forge common understanding, to look at the same operational pictures. This is just how it's done. Partnerships work best when everyone benefits, when there is trust and accountability on all sides. My hope is that the plan we develop between the U.S. Space Force and the Italian Air Force will provide an excellent foundation for so much more. Yes, collaboration between our two nations, but also with other nations that share our values and interests. So let me close by stating the obvious. The space domain has never been more important or more complex. In the years ahead, I expect both of these statements to become even more true. New threats are emerging all the time, and we continue to depend more and more on space to fill the gaps and seams in our combined force. No nation can afford to go it alone, nor can we afford to wait for something to force our hand. We must build our future success on the partnerships we forged today. I am eternally grateful that Italy sees value in doing this with us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your talents. Thank you for your teamwork. Grazie and Semper Supra.
Thank you so much, General Saltzman, for your inspiring words, which really set the stage for us to move on to the core of the conference, the first panel discussion. Please, let's take a look first at this short video introduction.
Vision, strategy, decision. In aerospace, the future is built today. The geopolitical and technological transformations shaping our era demand a clear strategy, strong policies, solid alliances, challenges won't wait. They are here. Now. That's why we must act. We must set the course. We must define the skies of tomorrow. AeroSpace Power Conference 2025. Fighting and winning in the sky beyond the next decade.
A peer-to-peer conflict is today more likely than in the past 3 decades for NATO members and partners. The key to re-establish an effective deterrence is being able to win if called to fight. But in order to win complex, large-scale wars and to end it as soon as possible, we need a clear, coherent, and shared vision by the Air Forces on key elements. What are our priority targets? What is the status of our current and prospective integration of policies and procedures, information sharing, technologies, and advanced weapon systems, just to name a few? To discuss these sensitive topics, we gathered some of the most brilliant and knowledgeable professionals in this aerospace sector. So we're glad to welcome on stage our moderator, Lieutenant General Giovanni Fantuzzi, Director of the Center for Military Aeronautical Studies of the Air Force Association. And our 5 distinguished experts: Dr. Justin Bronk, Senior Research Fellow for Air Power and Technology in the Military Sciences team at the Royal United Services Institute. Air Marshal Johnny Stringer, Deputy Commander of NATO's Allied Air Command. General Kevin B. Schneider, Commander of the Pacific Air Forces and Air Component Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. General Hiroaki Uchikura, Chief of Staff of the Japan Air Self-Defense Force.
Hi.
And of course, the Chief of Staff of Aeronautica Militare, Lieutenant General Luca Goretti. Now, before leaving the stage to General Fantuzzi, a procedural ground rule for you. Everyone from the audience will be able to actively influence the discussion. Before and during each panel, you will be able to ask any question about the possible future evolution of air and space power using the question section of the 2025 AeroSpace Power Conference application on your phones. Few questions will be selected by our academic division and posted on the tablet of our moderator. General Fantuzzi, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Greta. Thank you very much. I must start echoing my chief, saying, wow, the view is fantastic from here. To see so many aerospace stakeholders and lovers is really, giving a fantastic feeling. So thank you very much for your attendance. Becoming serious, distinguished civilian and military authorities, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's a great honor and a real privilege for me to moderate the first panel of AeroSpace Conference 2025. It's a unique opportunity to get firsthand the vision, the goals, and the challenges that senior leaders of the Free World Air Forces are facing. This first panel will address the strategic level of aerospace power in light of the current international security environment and possible future scenarios. We will concentrate, though, in the military strategy of training, planning, and be ready to employ airspace power up to a peer-to-peer conflict. The Russian war against Ukraine and the challenges posed by China have made the scenario of a peer-to-peer conflict more likely than in the past 3 decades for NATO members and partners, probably. As the ongoing global geopolitical competition is expected to grow in the mid to long term, free world air forces have to prepare to fight and win complex, large-scale conflicts. First, in order to prevent them with an effective deterrence, and second, should the latter fail, to put an end to war as soon as possible. I believe that it's also necessary to improve and enhance the strategic dialogue between the political leadership and the military one, in order to generate a shared, clear, and deeper understanding of the threats and the risks necessary to make the best choices to protect our population and territories through the peace, crisis, conflict continuum. Such understanding should also be better communicated to the public opinion in NATO countries and partner nations. the past, present, and likely future successes of air forces largely depends on access to key technologies and advanced weapon systems. This, in turn, makes the aerospace and industry a critical partner and player. Public-private partnerships are therefore key to address the challenges posed by technological competition and require a clear vision by the air forces on their future and a coherent strategy and policy. So at this time, I'll do my very best to stimulate this fantastic cadre of senior leaders and researchers with direct questions, even a little provocative, if you allow me. We'll try really to get to the meat of it, to face the real challenges, to look at the real threats. We are going to start first with a question to each of the senior panelists, asking them for an around 10 minutes answer, if I may. Then we are going to open the floor to questions from the audience, from you. It's a great opportunity, and I strongly suggest you to take the advantage of, as Greta said, of the conference application that allows you to pose a question, not a comment, but a brief, straightforward question. Thank you so much. So without further ado, I would like to start with our first panelist that sits in the front line of the Alliance. Air Marshal Johnny Stringer, Royal Air Force Deputy AIRCOM in Ramstein. Johnny, we are living in a time where the Alliance is kind of rethinking itself to face the threats posed by Russia, looking with a great attention to the possible instability of the Indo-Pacific. It is a possibility that somehow the United States of America umbrella will be less strong in the near future. The question to you is NATO integrated air and missile defense fit for the current and future threats, including adversary missiles and aircrafts operating at higher altitude and speed, like hypersonics, for example? To you, Johnny.
Giovanni, thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be back in Rome. Thank you very much for the question. At Ramstein, amongst other things, I'm one of the folk responsible for the air and missile defense of NATO nations in Europe, so it's very much something that's on my mind 24/7. Before I say some specifics on your question, just a couple of thoughts, if I may, right at the start. The first is, and it's so pertinent, by the way, to integrated air and missile defense, is I don't think we have the luxury of thinking left to right too easily for sort of, yeah, it's difficult now, but what does it look like in 20 years? We actually have to work back from that 20 years forward from now and work out how we improve at pace. And if I give one example, NATO realized in 1958 that because of the pace of threat evolution at that time, it needed to approach air defense in Europe differently. It did 2 years of study work, and then it spent the next 25 years producing a whole series of enhancements from weapon systems that were developed, such as Patriot, through base hardening and development of weapon systems and aircraft. I don't think we have the luxury of 25 years. We've got to move a lot faster, and that informs what I'll say in a moment. And the second is, and we've already heard it, we've already seen some of it on the screens, air forces, airmen, airwomen do tend to sort of coalesce around things and around platforms. And I do think, again, some of what I'll say on air and missile defense speaks to how we might want to think more about sixth generation air warfare and not just sixth generation platforms. So you've heard a lot of the context already. We are in challenging times. I would argue that for NATO, we've kind of lived under two long shadows. The first shadow was about 30 years long, and it was called We Won the Cold War, and it kicked off in about 89, 90. And the second shadow, not quite as long, was 20 years of counterinsurgency operations where, to pick up General Saltzman's comment, space was most definitely seen as a free good, and we didn't really have to worry too much about air power and being contested. So arguably, although it's quite expensive, its application and its domain, its environment was kind of a free good. And we are no longer in either of those places. So I would argue that integrated air and missile defense, IAMD, is frankly where just about every defensive and offensive aspect of air operations and air power comes together. The balance between offensive and defensive, the importance of command and control, genuinely cross-domain, all-domain, multi-domain, choose your favorite title, operations come together, the ability, nay, the requirement to sense at range early and swiftly, and also to confront what traditionally were the challenges, but also the opportunities of time, speed, and distance, but now, on top of that, great and very cheaply, in relative terms, achievable mass that we have to now contend with. You talked on threat evolution, Giovanni. Absolutely right. At the end of a spectrum, you highlighted things like now air-launched ballistic missiles, weapons that are routinely high speed, whether that is hypersonic or not, for large parts of that profile, with a lot of maneuvering potential as well. So that's a kind of stressing at one end of a spectrum. But equally, we are dealing with thousands of systems that cost a few hundred euros, dollars, pounds, whatever, to produce, and can be produced at the rate for industrial printed ones of 15 an hour. It's something we've never had to worry about. So for those of us who fondly remember, you know, slapping your simulated air-to-air kill down as a kind of simulated flogger or an early whatever, you know, flanker was coming the other way, we're actually going to be dealing more with coping with munitions and missiles than just dealing with the platforms that carry them. Also, by the way, the ranges at which these systems are now being launched against us are in the thousands of kilometers and not the hundreds of kilometers that might have been a truism during and towards the end of the Cold War. And by the way, not only are we seeing a lot of that in the real world sadly playing out with Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, with what we are seeing in the Middle East between Iran and Israel, two obviously notable occasions over the last year or so. But frankly, that vector has been apparent for years. So we have seen this coming. I was out being the UK Air Component Commander in the Middle East 8 years ago, and you could see then that Daesh, ISIS, were reaping the rewards of the democratization of air power and the democratization of high-end technology. A few £100, a laptop, some zealous imagination, and off you go. So there's a very broad spectrum now, Giovanni, that we have to deal with, which would have been unfamiliar to us even 10 years ago. So I think that drives some obvious requirements. For me, you could probably bucket them into the need to sense, because if you can't actually see what's coming at you, you can't deal with it. You then need the understand, the command and control that allows you to execute as required your forces, which, by the way, had better be postured appropriately for it. And they are going to be the things with the fourth element here, with the effectors, whether they are classic kinetic ones or more sexy and exciting non-kinetics, but you've got to be doing all four of those things. That obviously drives a whole bunch of capability requirements. I'm sure other people will talk about those more broadly over the next day or so, so I won't go into too many specifics. But what I would say, and back to why I talk about 6th gen air warfare, is a lot of that stuff, if you're going to execute it at scale, runs into two things: unaffordium, because it's too expensive, but don't worry, it's also made of unobtainium because your defense industrial base can't produce it. So you're going to have to be on the right side of both the cost curve, stuff that is cheap enough that will do the job for you, but also the production curve. But you can actually make enough of what you're going to require. And in my office at Ramstein is a, basically it's a one-way defensive counter-UAS drone. It was printed at Ramstein from a design sent across from another country. It cost $9, and it was printed in about 5 minutes. And when you put all of the conventional stuff into it to make it work, it's less than 900 euros. Posture and laydown then. You already heard a little bit of this earlier. Again, I won't go into massive detail, but I do think we need to be thinking much more about kind of fences when we talk about layered air defense, i.e. what gives me my first opportunity to take something out at the longest range from what it is that's being threatened with the cheapest system that I can do it with. Because if I miss, at least I'll have a second and potentially even a third go at it. There are going to be some things, we spoke about them earlier, where you're going to have to send your very best, and it's going to be expensive. There are a lot of things, one-way attack drones, subsonic cruise missiles, that can be taken out much more cheaply if you know what you're doing and you've got what you need. I spoke about this being a genuinely all-component, all-domain exercise. If I'm being honest, I think too many of our nations, including our air forces, went away from that concept over the last 30 years, and we've got to re-find it pretty damn quickly. So we engage routinely with friends in our armies, in our navies, in our space forces, and also on the more offensive end of cyber to make sure we're pulling together that which we need to be as effective and as effective as quickly as we can. We also need to rediscover the stuff we used to be pretty good at on the passive side. So camouflage, concealment, deception is not something that our granddads did. It's something we need to make sure we're doing again now, particularly perhaps with deception. And we're putting a lot of effort on our Air C2 in NATO, that it is now resilient, dispersed, survivable, and it has the capacity that we need. And we will be opening NATO's third Air Operations Centre in Norway later this year. You also, by the way, need the CIS, the tools, the digital backbone, the networks that actually ensure you can pass the data, the information, the understanding around, because without that, frankly, the rest of your spend may well be for naught. Quickly on policy implications, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll give you just one, which is, given the threat I've just set out, if you think you can be reactive and deal with every munition, let alone aircraft that's coming your way, then sorry, that's for the birds. We are going to have to be offensive to be defensive. That still, by the way, sits within what you need as a second moving defensive alliance, which of course NATO is and will always be. But we're going to have to deal with the threat at what I would call the enterprise level. Launch sites, lines of communication, C2, where these things are actually produced. Because otherwise, frankly, we run the risk of losing the IAMD battle. And that means we have probably lost in Europe. We need to make sure our experimentation is up to speed. That is becoming, apologies from an Italian audience, a leitmotif for what we are doing in Allied Air Command. And my final point would be on the industrial side. There's space for everybody here, folks, not just primes, but small and medium-sized enterprises, because the pace of adoption and adaptation demands nothing less. Giovanni, thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. Yeah, I think Johnny underlined For instance, a good food for thought who is responsible of developing GCAP, you know, talking about your comment on air warfare and not only platform, you know. And second, I think your remark on time, we don't have 25 years, and we need to communicate to the public domain that the threats are real, and we have to be offensive against the threats, right? Good, so now we'll change gear, and our second panelist is a well-known RUSI professor, to whom I'd like to ask, if he allows me, a kind of a scholar question, to understand better the academia point of view. Professor Justin Bronk is a senior researcher fellow in RUSI, UK. Justin, if we foresee a possible use of aerospace power, all out, in a scenario of a peer-to-peer conflict, which are the challenges for modern free world air forces? What should be the priorities of integrated air and missile defense, also considering the respective assets' strategic value? To you.
Thank you. It's a nice, easy question as the least experienced person in front of 2,000 people. So, in terms of the challenge, I think critical is, as you alluded to, being specific about the time frame within which you see that challenge occurring. So to be specific, a couple of things to bear in mind. I'll try to use as little jargon as possible here, bearing in mind that some of us did not grow up with NATO AP3- whatever it was, doctrine. The threat is for Europeans having to respond quickly and with overwhelming force to an opportunistic use of military force against alliance territory by Russia in the coming years. And in the Indo-Pacific, it is for the United States potentially having to try and project massive pulses of firepower in to basically push back a Chinese invasion of whether it's Taiwan or other contested territories that might come up in the Indo-Pacific across vast distances. They're two different problem sets, but both potentially take place in the coming few years. It's not the medium to long term, it's relatively short. To give an idea of the scale of the potential problem and why air is so critical, the Russian force engaged against Ukraine currently is more than twice the size of the force that invaded in 2022. They are not only more than twice the size, but despite the nearly 900,000 casualties that they have taken over 3 years, they show no signs whatsoever of wanting to stop. They are not interested in peace talks. They are continuing to escalate, in fact. And their military output in terms of tanks, missiles, ammunition, outstrips Europe put together, which is kind of pathetic on our part, let's be honest. This is a country with very limited GDP, massive demographic limitations. It's under heavy sanctions, which are relatively effective. And yes, it has help from North Korea, from increasingly from China, particularly from Iran, but still, the rate of production is fairly staggering. You're talking in the vicinity of 300 new T-90Ms last year, going to be more this year, and almost none of those are going to the front. The production of long-range missiles is more than 4 times what it was in February 2022. And when the Russian armed forces finally managed to eject the Ukrainians just from the Kursk Oblast, they then had the choice of where to redeploy 22 brigades of the Russian army, just around Kursk. Most of our nations would struggle to deploy and sustain a single brigade for serious warfighting in Europe. So if we look at the threat, if the question is, at what point from a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, whatever that looks like, how quickly could Russia threaten a limited territorial attack with military forces to take a small amount of territory to provoke an Article 5 and see what happens? It's probably about 12 months. If the question is reframed as how quickly could the Russian armed forces reconstitute their ability to conduct maneuver warfare at scale according to their doctrine, that's probably about 3 years from the end of hostilities in Ukraine, because it will take them about 2 years to roll their units reconstituted once they've filled in the gaps after about a year in terms of ammunition, new equipment, etc. It will take them about 2 years to roll those units through a major exercise program to redevelop the ability to fight at the tactical level with an orders process, which is what they currently can't do because of the attrition. They can't run company scale, battalion scale warfare properly. But everything above the regimental level, they are not only bigger than they were, they are much better than they were. They are now able to do find, fix, and strike both against battlefield targets and in the deep, faster and at a greater scale than NATO forces in Europe, and they do it every single day. They're very, very good at it now. So our land forces, the cold truth of it is, our land forces cannot be developed in Europe to be ready in the threat timeframe to credibly guarantee that we can push the Russians out of anywhere they choose to mass forces and attack us. So it has to be air power. It has to be air power that is our edge. And unfortunately, while I see the logic that has led to a lot of pronouncements like air superiority is too expensive, we can't afford it, sorry, you have no choice. We have to have air superiority. Because if we don't, there is no obvious answer to why the Russians cannot take territory without us, for example, going nuclear. And that is doubly true if the United States is simultaneously involved in a conflict in the Indo-Pacific, which is, by the way, the most likely opportunity, and I've said this at ASPC 23, the most likely scenario in which Russia risks conflict with European NATO members is when China has done something in the Indo-Pacific and the United States has almost all of its available military enablement and firepower in the Indo-Pacific. So that's the threat. Where do I think the focus needs to be in that scenario? Well, first and foremost, let's put it in non-doctrinal terms. We need to find, suppress, fix, and kill the main Russian surface-to-air missile radars, early warning radars, C2, and then start working on their command and control backups, and particularly their logistics, their resupply for fuel, munitions, etc., for that air defense network, so that we can initially get pulses of close air support to our formations that will be at that point under attack by vastly superior firepower-equipped forces in Eastern Europe or wherever it happens to be. Could be up in the Arctic, could be down south increasingly, especially if Ukraine were to fall. And then work towards having air superiority so we can get back to doing what our air forces do really well, which is obliterating fielded forces of tanks and armored vehicles with Paveway, JDAM, Hellfire, Brimstone. And let's be clear, the reason we went to that close air support heavy model is there has never been a more efficient way to obliterate military forces. What you get for your 18,000-pound JDAM is an astonishingly effective weapon against any tank, hardened fighting position, radar system, you name it. And it's $18,000, and you can carry multiples of them per jet. You can cycle them 3 or 4 times a day. That firepower is extraordinary if we can bring it to bear. But the problem, of course, is you have to roll back the air defenses. So, SEAD-DIAD, of course, Italy, a leading nation in Europe on that, with the excellent work done by the 6 Stormo guys in Gedi. But SEAD-DIAD, for too long, we've left purely to the Americans, and with the best will in the world, most of their SEAD-DIAD capability will be in the Indo-Pacific from here on out. And so we need to step up for more in Europe. Our platforms are broadly fine. Our weapons, in terms of what we could buy, whether that's American, AARGM, AARGM-ER, whether it's potentially UK, Spear, whether it's Norwegian strike missile, or just going with a lot of glide bombs with cheap massed, propeller-powered capabilities of the type Johnny mentioned that we've developed with Ukrainian colleagues. That's all fine, but you need to layer them together, and you need lots of them. And if the answer is we can't afford enough of them, then you need to stop doing other missions in order to afford more munitions. Over the last 25 years, we have skewed our air forces away from the combat-focused fast jet fleets, which we built to fight the Russians last time around, and we've pushed them towards more and more rotary lift, fixed-wing lift, permissive ISR, and that was all fine. That's exactly what we needed for those counterinsurgency fights. But if the answer is with those 4 structures, we cannot afford to be able to roll back Russian air defenses because we can't afford enough munitions, we can't afford to train, to fly enough, then sorry, you have to cut those other non-discretionary missions or get more money from your politicians. The core business of air forces is to win air superiority. It's too expensive isn't good enough. You already have the munitions, you already have the aircraft developed, you have wonderful tactics, so now you need to support them with the munitions, and you need to train to not just competency, proficiency. That means spending far more time concentrating on your core warfighting missions. And again, if that means fewer overseas detachments, fewer overseas exercises, fine. Concentrate on the core mission first. Then you can go and do it elsewhere. Some of the great examples in Europe, there are excellent examples of this. Finland, one of the newest NATO members, does very little other with its air force than train to fight the Russians, and they're very good at it. They make really good use of the aircraft and the weapons and the technology and the dispersal model that they have. The US Air Force has a few remaining in the Air National Guard now, but single mission squadrons who, despite flying magnificent but relatively outdated Cs and Ds, are still some of the finest air superiority pilots around. Why? Because they do nothing else. So again, I think specialization on those core warfighting missions, air superiority, SEAD, DIAD, and then CAS for those nations that can't go down the SEAD, DIAD route. Focus on the CAS, focus on doing it in a contested environment where you can, like the Swedes do with F-21 in Luleå. And one final plea, I think, from me in terms of that move towards thinking in terms of proficiency with the aircraft, with the weapons, with the tactics we have, which if we resource them right, will be fine against the European threat. China's a really different beast. We always say people are our greatest asset. We're going to win because our people are better. Why is it then that reconditioning or recapitalizing your advanced fast jet trainers is always the last thought with Air Force procurement? How is it we've allowed in multiple countries our Hawks to age out, our Alpha Jets to age out? And the answer is, well, we can probably do it with turboprops going into fast jets. You probably can do it, but we've overtrained for decades for a reason, because it produced that human edge. And now that's where we're taking risk. That's where we're looking for savings. I think that's a huge mistake. If you look at where air forces typically lose fast jets, it's not in combat. It's not even in high-end training. It's usually transiting to or from the AO in IMC conditions with a heavily loaded jet with limited fuel in bad weather. Because while you can train to be excellent in a glass cockpit in a turboprop, what you cannot do is train to realistic, jet-powered, 3 to 4 miles a minute IMC flying, which is boring, but it's actually the thing that's going to get you killed if you screw it up in the real world. And it's really easy to screw it up, I'm sure. When you come back after an 8-hour mission, things are going a bit badly. You've got low fuel. You're flying into a deployed base you've never been to before. There's not many lights on. And you're suddenly having to do that IMC quickly with limited fuel. You cannot train to that in a simulator, not for real, not with the fear. And this is something I get from every training base that I visit, is this same thing. So if people are truly your greatest asset and you're concentrating on warfighting training for high-end proficiency, don't neglect the advanced fast jet training.
Thank you, Justin. So I got the good news is that AeroSpace Power Conference 2025 nailed the two real threats, as Justin underlined. So the possibility of having rather a quick problem, let me say, with Russia, maybe in contemporary with instability in the Indo-Pacific, having the USA, involved in both. I'm strongly with you saying that air superiority is a must, and SEAD will be the first mission that we should and we have to keep ready to pursue. One, let me say, worry from an old, fighter pilot is stocks. Of course, the mission that you underline require, a capability of sustaining day of battles. Then I think air forces and industry must be ready to have and provide. But now we really have a unique opportunity to pose a question to the Air Chief of the Japanese Air Force. We really would like to understand which is the perspective of an allied Air Force sitting in the other side of the globe, and how we can really cooperate and get airspace power ready to be employed. General Hiroaki Uchikura is the Chief Air Self-Defense Force, Japan. Uchi, being the Air Chief of a relevant Air Force in the Indo-Pacific area, do you think that current military organization and technologies ensure adequate information sharing to support the chain of command and decision-making processes, especially if we will be forced to face a peer-to-peer conflict? Uchi.
Good morning. Buongiorno, ladies and gentlemen. Lieutenant General Giovanni Fantuzzi, thank you very much for a kind introduction, and thank you very much for asking such a question, which is related, geographically related question. I am General Uchikura, Chief of Staff, Japan Air Self-Defense Force, Kokujetai. I am responsible for force structure and capability building, both air and space power. First of all, I'd like to extend my sincere appreciation to our esteemed host and my friend, Lieutenant General Goretti, for inviting me again, just as he graciously did 2 years ago to celebrate Italian Air Force's 100th anniversary. It is a great honor to speak on behalf of Air Forces of the Indo-Pacific region and address you all today on a subject that will shape both our present and future security. In the meantime, I must express my deep regret that the end of war in Ukraine still remains unpredictable. The threats we face today are no longer abstract. They are real, imminent, and growing. From Russia's war against Ukraine to China's attempt to change the status quo in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea, to the rapid evolution of North Korea's military capabilities, our security environment is under profound strain. If I were to generalize this situation, the likelihood of conflict with peer adversaries is now significantly higher than ever. Under such circumstances, our most urgent task is clear. We must understand the battle space, make decisions, and take actions rapidly and accurately. What enables us to do this is information, but not merely possessing information. What we need is a seamless, integrated information environment that spans all domains: air, land, sea, cyber, and space. In recent years, many of our air forces have worked tirelessly to develop multi-domain operation, MDO, and strengthen our C4ISR capabilities: command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Through the application of AI, real-time data integration, cloud-based infrastructure, and collaborative tools, we have seen dramatic improvement in our situational awareness and decision-making. But we must take a hard look in the mirror. Can these cutting-edge technology truly have resiliency in a high-intensity conflict against peer competitors? If we are honest with ourselves, the answer, at least for now, is not yet. Space is a key domain. In modern warfare, space is no longer just a supporting domain. As General Saltzman mentioned earlier, it is a warfighting domain of competition and confrontation. Almost every air operation depends upon space domain for ISR, positioning, early warning, and communications. Also, some nations are now fielding operational level capabilities such as anti-satellite weapons, cyber intrusions, and electronic jamming. Our space infrastructure is increasingly vulnerable. To address this urgent and serious issue, we are advancing more resilient and distributed satellite architectures, forging partnership with commercial providers and sharing space-related information with our allies. Space is now fully interrelated domain, from strategic planning to day-to-day training. But no single nation alone can do this. We need a shared vision and a coordinated effort among allies and partners. Technology is absolutely important, but it's not cure-all. We also need to reform our organizational structure. In March, Japan established a new Japan Self-Defense Force Joint Operation Command, which strengthen unified command and control across the land, maritime, and air, space, cyber component. To prepare for highly contested environment where communication may be denied, we need to implement mission command, the ability for commanders to act autonomously with intent across the entire force. Education, training, simulations, and decision support tools are all central to this transformation. Furthermore, in the Indo-Pacific region, multinational cooperation adds significant complexity to information sharing. It requires not only technical compatibility, but also legal alignment, policy coordination, and above all, trust. Through close cooperation with the United States, Australia, and others, we are tackling the integration of communication protocols, information security, and cyber defense. But there is still a lot of work to be done. As I conclude, I'd like to share several key perspectives. First, our capabilities for information sharing and decision-making have significantly advanced, and these capabilities are already delivering results in the field. The Air Operations Center, which is constantly connected to the headquarters led by my friend General Gambi Schneider, seated beside me, is a critical enabler. Regular virtual conferences with NATO air chiefs facilitated by General Scott Hecker, who is recently retired, and also Air Marshal Stringer, are also proving to be a powerful mechanism for alignment. In terms of space operations, participation in asterisk exercise hosted by France Airspace Force and also Shriva War Game and Global Sentinel exercise is another great enabler to further strengthen our capability. Second, in a full-scale conflict with a peer adversary, we must be prepared for serious degradation of our information systems due to space denial, cyber attacks, and electronic jamming. This means our system must be designed with resilience and redundancy from the outset. Third, third and perhaps most importantly, trust is a decisive factor in future warfare. Trust in our technologies, trust in our commanders, and trust among allies and like-minded countries, including NATO members. Trust can only be built through transparency and cooperation in peacetime. In this context, Japan Air Defense Force participation as an observer in Exercise Air Defender 23, as well as a visit and bilateral, multilateral trainings with the European Air Forces, including Italian Air Force last year, have all been catalytic moment. Moreover, the shared cooperation of cutting-edge platforms and as the F-35 and GCAP systems will further reinforce our information sharing capabilities. All of these lead to building a lasting trust among ourselves. Finally, for air and space power to be truly effective, we need three things: strategic thinking, joint action, and a shared sense of purpose. Through a whole of society approach, uniting government, industry, and academia, I am confident that we can uphold stability and deterrence even in the uncertain era. If we stay united and act with foresight, all based upon trust, we will be able to safeguard peace and stability not only in the Indo-Pacific, but also across the world. Let me close by quoting the joint statement issued by NATO Secretary General Rutte and the Prime Minister Ishiba. The security of Euro-Atlantic and of the Indo-Pacific are interconnected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Uchi. Thank you very much. You are really a fighter pilot, time on target. Very, very informative, very interesting to understand how you perceive also the Russian-Ukraine conflict as a threat. But also, I don't know if the audience noticed, General Hiroaki is the first one that mentioned North Korea today. You know, we mentioned China several times, but of course in the area, North Korea is a player. I also like your comment on communication sharing, the resilience of that we are not there yet in case of a full conflict. So I think that's a strong message for air forces to, you know, to invest in communication sharing. And I think that everybody in the whole dealing with HR, with human resources, liked your comment on organizational structure. You know, it's not only platform technology, but it's also the org chart that should reflect how we fight the air battle today. So that's important. And of course, trust. Trust, you underline trust very much. I cannot agree more. And I think that your presence here today is the sign that we are pursuing trust. So thanks, Uchi. So staying in the Indo-Pacific area, we have another great opportunity to ask who is in charge of air power in the area, what is the vision of the major contributor to NATO sitting in the middle of Pacific Ocean. General Kevin Schneider, Commander PACAF, United States Air Force. Kevin, being in charge of the Pacific Air Force Command, and having said that airspace warfare has global coverage and no boundaries, the question to you is, what does it mean for the strategies and policies of NATO members and partners? What are the challenges for air power in a peculiar environment such as the Pacific area? Kevin.
Giovanni, thank you very much for the question. And I guess I'll break it down this way, and I'll try to get to the second part of that before going into the first. But the first obvious challenge is the geography of the theater. And you know, each of our nations, each of our governments may define the Indo-Pacific a little bit differently when you look on a map. In the United States, when we draw boundary lines, it's roughly 52% of the Earth's surface. And I realize General Saltzman is thinking only 52% of the Earth's surface. But it's about 100 million square miles. So it's about 20 times larger than the landmass of Europe. If you were to fly from Los Angeles to Hawaii, it's a 5.5 to 6 hour flight. You go from Hawaii to Guam, it's another 8.5 hours. Congratulations, you are halfway into the theater at that point. You know, to get to Taiwan, it's another 3 hour flight. To get to India, you're going to more than double that. So just the vast expanses and the challenges. Air power certainly has a lot of options when it comes to speed, but in terms of our ability to maintain throughput, we are all challenged in that regard. The second piece that I'll point out is just the importance of the region, and I think everybody understands it, and I did not get good grades in my economics courses in college, but just to highlight that what happens in the Indo-Pacific region in terms of stability, security, and prosperity isn't only limited to the region, but it touches the world. On any given day, 1/3 of the world's maritime trade is at sea, sailing through the South China Sea. Roughly 1/5 of the world's trade is in and around the Taiwan Straits. So any disruption to that, any challenge to that will have rapid implications for every one of our nations here in this room. And that relative peace, that relative stability, and that prosperity has been largely underwritten by the military forces of like-minded allies and partners for the past 80 years. But there are challenges to that, and I'll touch on a couple of them quickly. And Admiral Paparo will describe them as revisionist autocracies. I have other colorful names for them as well, but really attempting to rewrite the rules-based international order and to redefine trade, commerce, stability in their own terms. And all three of those are opportunists, and someone touched on that earlier before. So if something happens in China or with the United States, North Korea, Russia are more than willing and able to take advantage of that that situation to advance their own objectives. So we can never take our eye off the ball, if I can use that sports analogy. Next slide, please. I'll start with North Korea, and just to highlight, a continuing, ballistic missile capability. It grows more and more capable with deeper inventories every day. This is a picture from last year where they launched 18 ballistic missiles simultaneously. They did another test in the last 24 hours where they launched another barrage as well. But there's an underlying nuclear capability that goes along with it, as well as a growing relationship with Russia that has an exchange. What ought to be of concern of all of us is in that exchange is information, it's technology, it's subject matter expertise that's coming back into North Korea to make these capabilities even more so in terms of their precision and range. But speaking of Russia, and I recognize as we look on a map that Russia power projects into the European theater more than it does into the Pacific, but it still has an eastern seaboard, and it puts airplanes, and it puts ships, and it puts submarines into the Pacific, and we have to contend with that, and we have to watch that from my perspective. So for the next slide, when that comes up, it'll show a recent intercept. This is in the far background is a Russian bomber that's flying towards Alaska. The picture's taken from a US F-16 that's intercepting that, and this is a highly unsafe, dangerous interaction by a Russian fighter towards the F-16. These long-range bomber patrols happen more and more regularly. There were a number of them that happened through the course of last summer. And we've also watched as the Russians continue to do more of these with the Chinese. And since 2019, they have done 9 combined bomber patrols. The last one, which they did, went into the Arctic, which was a first. And it's not just the United States. These bomber patrols, whether they're Russian or Russian and Chinese, will circumnavigate Japan, go towards Korea or other parts of the region. Next slide, please. But certainly the topic that dominates most of the conversation in the Indo-Pacific is China. Not only is a rapid growth of the People's Liberation Army's military capability in all domains, space, air power, land, maritime, ballistic missiles, cyber, et cetera, but it's the bullying behaviors that go along with it. And General Romeo Bronner, who's the Chief of Defense in the Philippines, has an acronym, ICAD. It's the illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive behaviors. This picture, I like it for its irony. I don't like it for the content. But this is a Chinese Coast Guard vessel ramming a Philippine Coast Guard vessel in the Philippine exclusive economic zone. Anywhere else in the world, our Coast Guards are out there to save lives and protect property, not in China, where they are an arm of the People's Liberation Army. This happens on a regular basis. I could have picked a picture from about 3 weeks ago. It doesn't have the same perspective on it, and you can't see the side of the hull where it actually says China Coast Guard. But this happens in the West Philippine Sea on a regular basis, and it also happens in and around Taiwan in a little bit different way. And when speaking about Taiwan, Admiral Paparo looks at the Chinese events that happen, the multi-domain pressurization activities, and he doesn't describe them as exercises. He describes them as rehearsals. And to the point that has been made by many here today, that the situation grows more and more tense, more and more challenging, and our ability to determine indications of warning gets a little bit less as China continues to position more of their capabilities right on their coastline, and certainly does more and more events in and around Taiwan on a regular basis. Next slide. If I were to stop the presentation there, you'd probably leave depressed and disappointed with what I have to say. The reason that there is a good news aspect to this is we have been able to maintain the relative peace, the relative stability for a number of reasons, and I break it down simply into teamwork, but more specifically, it's our people which a few people have highlighted today. It is the inherent professionalism of our people, the men and women in uniform that do this every day. And we push a lot of authorities and a lot of things downhill, and we expect and demand a lot of our people, and we train them to do that. Those are things that do not happen in North Korea, Russia, or China. The joint force, which was touched on as well, we don't do anything alone within our military branches. Each of us brings a capability or set of capabilities. We partner together within our own nations to work together as a team. And again, we have refined that over the years. But the last piece of it is allies and partners. And you look at the strength of what allies and partners do. We don't do anything alone in terms of crisis, conflict, or even in competition. And the inherent benefits of that teamwork cannot go overstated. Next slide. And this is your humor break for today. So I was fortunate. I got to learn that lesson, or I was exposed to that lesson very early on in my career. So it's a picture from my pilot training class. And for those of you who have gone to NJEP will recognize where we are at the ops building. But that's my class from 89, 08. Hair was a little bit browner, a little bit fuller. I did not own a comb at the time. But it's a multinational experience from which I was exposed at the very beginning. And I still remember my T-37 instructor pilots, Harold Margasupe from the Luftwaffe, Yavuz Osoy from the Turkish Air Force, and Spiros Mastorakis from the Greek Air Force. So from day one, I was fortunate to be exposed to that. And that has been, again, a strength and an inherent capability, of all of our services as we continue to do more and more together. Next slide, please. So from a Pacific Air Force perspective, from the Indo-Pacific, and I get to see this play out more and more. Slide, if we can bring it up. So this is a picture, I think it's Ingo Gerhardt's, circa 2022, going past a cloud-covered Mount Fuji. As the German Air Force is deploying out there for an event. In 2023, I was at a Pacific Air Chief conference, and I was talking to one of the European air chiefs, and I made the comment, hey, it's great that NATO countries are participating out here and doing more and more, and I kind of asked the why question, and he gave me the obvious answer to my very dumb question, which was, we recognize the dragon has two heads. One of them may point towards Europe. And we have to be always cognizant of that. Next slide, please. And in 2024, the European activities and participation in the Indo-Pacific kicked off with a number of events. Pacific Skies was a set of 5 different exercises that touched Alaska, Hawaii, Japan, Australia, and India. That is a tremendous commitment in terms of time, treasure, resources, and readiness by European nations to do that, and it does not go unnoticed. This picture was taken on the ramp at one of those exercises in Alaska at the start of about the 6-week deployment. Next slide, please. This is, again, another picture. The man on the left is Lieutenant General Dave Nahom, who was the commander of 11th Air Force, taken on the ramp in Alaska. You'll recognize Ingo. Not hard to find pictures of Ingo flying on the internet, which I applaud and envy very much. But again, just it shows the time and the commitment to the Indo-Pacific. Next slide. And then one of the keystone events was not a US exercise, but an Australian one, pitch black, 20 nations, 145 aircraft, 4,500 airmen that participated. If you can do the build on that, and the flags will come up. And if you look at the bottom, you'll see about six NATO nations that are participating. And that carries a huge, huge message. Next slide, please. And part of that was the deployment of the Italian carrier Cavour during that. And again, the ability to integrate with other services, to work in both the air and maritime domain simultaneously was a fantastic stepping stone and building block to greater capability. Next slide. And that continues on as the UK deploys the Prince of Wales out into the theater for 8 months. again, to do a number of events and exercises. It'll build on what the Queen Elizabeth did in Carrier Strike Group Operation 21 a few years ago. And again, I applaud the commitment there. And if I could just, I guess, wrap this up in terms of back to the first question and what it means in terms of strategy and policies. And I believe NATO nations have this right. You know, the more that we can work together, the more that we can do together. We go past interoperability, which is just our ability to work together. And we go towards interchangeability, which is the ability to do each other's jobs and the ability to load share. We don't know what the next crisis, the next conflict is necessarily going to look like. We certainly focus on a Taiwan contingency, but who knows? And you know, all of us have got to be prepared. So the more that we train together, team together, build together, work together, the better off we are to be able to respond, you know, as an international community. Because multilateralism matters, and a few of you have made the point in terms of messaging to our nations, but certainly messaging to potential adversaries. And of all the things that raise the alarm in places like Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang, it's when we do things as a multinational response. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So from Kevin's remarks, we understand clearly that the Indo-Pacific is a huge geographic scenario that poses a lot of threat of stability, and that stability can change very rapidly. And I think also here we have to make the public domain understand that that stability can have impact on our life in Europe also. For instance, we order on Amazon something that goes through the Malacca Strait, you know, is that strait, you know, clear or not, you know? Important, I think, your remark on North Korea and Russia-China relationship, you know, I think is something that at least we Europeans have to think about it. The limited warning time, I think, is the common denominator. So we have less and less warning time. So we have to be ready to react, you know, soon. Multinational training, I think, is at least for the Italian Air Force, is a strong goal, and your slide demonstrated that. So I think is a good and positive way forward. Okay, so I was forgetting one thing though, that I didn't get the last part of your briefing. So if you can invite me in HICAM, I'll come to Hawaii, you know, to better understand that. I'm sorry, I'm joking. Staying in the Indo-Pacific, excuse me, now we have really a good opportunity, and allow me to be patriotic, and last but for sure not least, we have the possibility of stimulating the Aeronautica Militare chief, that is our host today. I have the privilege to know personally General Goretti since decades, so I can, you know, afford to be a little tough with him. General Luca Goretti, Chief of Air Staff, Aeronautica Militare. Luca, I'd like to pose a difficult and kind of provocative question to the Italian Air Chief. Are our policies and regulations, with respect to Aeronautica Militare, ready to transition quickly and with little to no warning from peacetime to crisis, then to conflict, in order to accept the higher level of risk that would be inevitable in wartime to maintain the needed operational advantage? Luca.
Thanks, Giovanni. First of all, I'm glad that you haven't put the 8506 classmate there. So I look very, very old then. But the question is very complex, but the answer is very, very simple. In order to be ready to convert during peacetime, from peacetime to wartime, we need to plan in ahead. And sometimes, and I look in all the chiefs that are in front of me, we have to confront ourselves with very simple questions. All the norms and rules that we normally have in the peacetime are fitted to be converted if you are going through and very rapidly to a wartime scenario. Sometimes the answer is no. It's very, very difficult to confront yourself when you have to make decisions, and then you have to confront with the norms and the rules that normally you put in place during peacetime operation. It's difficult. It's difficult to change it. It takes time. To change a law normally, especially in Italy, it will take more than 1 year. And you cannot have the time sometimes to wait 1 year to change the rules. The other thing is, when you make the decision how to train your people, you need to consider also which kind of capacity you need. And then you have to be real in front of the mirror. Are you capable to sustain the need for your people that have to do door fighting or war fighting and provide them in a time manner all the capacities they needed in order to win the battle? And sometimes the answer is no. I think that all the people that are in front of me are considering the same thing. And something happened when the Ukrainian war started, and I spent 3 days and 3 nights in my office trying to figure out if we were prepared. And I was dramatically waking up myself and say, we're not prepared. We are not prepared because I don't have any possibilities to rush and speed up some acquisition and speed up some training in order to prepare myself. And we were considering also to do something else in the Indo-Pacific, for instance, because we were looking at the situation that it was deteriorating very rapidly, and the same question arose. Are we prepared to move on the other side of the earth and be capable to sustain our lives in case we have to do it? And again, the answer was, who knows? Let's try. And I have to thank all the 3 stars that are here in the seats and say, why don't we go there and check? And we found out that just bringing 4 F-35 for the first time from Europe to Japan was a nightmare. Not to go there, but to get the permission to the international airfield to land for a stopover, get refueling, and then move on for the next stopover. Or maybe just find out that your cellular phones doesn't work on that place. Or maybe you need to file papers and papers of papers, and then when you land in Japan, you remember, the people that were supposed to give us fuel didn't show up. So we asked, Hiroaki, could you please give us fuel in order to fly the next day? And then we found out that the bureaucracy allows us not to have the fuel by paying the fuel to the Japanese, but you need to sign an agreement in order to share the fuel after. So those things are something that if you don't think about it, you will fail. And then again, I'm looking for all the chiefs that are sitting in front of me. We were used to, in the old times, to fly with the F-104s, with the Tornadoes, with the Typhoon, everywhere in Europe, go there, make the exercise, fill up some piece of paper, and then have the logistic people just sending back the piece of paper, and then the work will be done. Now, in order to train myself in Germany or in UK, I have to do a technical agreement in order to share the cross-servicing. Now, I have to do everything that is in the bureaucracy agreements when we build up the same aircraft, in order to get information sharing among us. This is something that you have to consider. Those are showstoppers to convert from peacetime situation to wartime situation. And we cannot afford not to be prepared. We cannot afford to reduce the time of training of our personnel, avoiding what in Europe we accepted as a European Union, that you need to go through different steps in time in order to get the clearance stage B, stage alpha, stage C for our maintenance personnel. Because in peacetime situation, everybody's considering that never happened. So military armed forces are treated like industries. So you have to go through steps, bureaucratic steps, in order to have the driver license to do the maintenance underneath an aircraft. And then you find out that the people that normally live in war every day, like the Israelis, they can give the same clearance in less than 3 weeks. So there's something that we have to think about it. There's something that we have to think about when we are in a peacetime situation. Because otherwise, everybody will point the finger on us if we were not ready. But we cannot have the finger pointing on us if we are not saying clearly what is necessary to solve this problem. We have to do it because we are sitting in a very tough position, especially this period of time, for the people that are sitting in the back of the stage. Because we are not making the war in the air, because we need to make the decision in the war room. They have to fight. So it's our responsibility to get rid of all these kind of bureaucracy systems in order to give them the possibility to be ready to fight. Otherwise, we will be failing. And then we cannot afford not to do this. Cross-servicing, agile movement of the aircraft is something that we have to consider. We had 20 years of peacetime situation in Europe, and then all of a sudden we woke up and we saw the wall back again. There is not a physical wall like we had in the past, but the wall is there. And when you talk to the Polish guy, when you talk to the Czech guy, when you talk to the Romanian, you will see the threat there, because they know exactly what happened when they were on the other side of the wall. We always been on one side in a very peaceful situation. They know exactly what happened that time. And we don't want to have them and us on that side again. So we have to do everything in our needs in order to reduce the bureaucracy, in order to reduce the possibility to lose time, because sometimes we don't have time to think. We have to act. Doing this with the new technologies, the systems, we need to also to prepare ourselves to move our fleets everywhere in the world, or even everywhere in our countries. So we need to establish a kind of agile equipment or scenarios in order to bring the F-35 or move the F-35 anywhere in our region and keep the people that are flying the F-35 able to plan flight and have all the weapons. And this is only if I'm considering Europe. But if we move to Indo-Pacific, you mentioned already, and Uchi mentioned already, it's a completely different story. We cannot walk. We need to swim. There are lots of water there. It's different from Europe. So if you don't consider to have combat support tools available, you're stuck on the ground. If you don't consider to pre-position weapons, common weapons in Australia, in Japan, in Guam, you can fly, not stop flying, from Italy, from UK, from Germany, and after 9 hours you land in Japan. And then what? You need to wait somebody just to bring you weapons. Otherwise, you will be a very good aircraft for air shows. And I don't think that in a wartime scenarios, we have to do air shows. We have to be prepared to shoot someone, or at least to deter. That's the main point, to deter someone that you better not do anything, because we will be there with our allies. And this is the most important thing. And this is why those kind of convention, with this kind of gathering, is necessary in order to see if someone has already solved this problem, because I'm not able right now to solve it. And this is my regular questions. How can I give to those guys in the back the possibility to win the fight? What is in my position? Right now, I'm suffering some lack of rules, and I hope that in the future, we will do this kind of situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that General Goretti underlined very well how the communication and exchange of information between political leadership, let me say, the machine of the state, the bureaucracy of our countries must do with the military, to understand which are the needs, especially if the military is requested to react quickly, like all of you have underlined. Said that, you received a lot of questions from the crowd, so I'll move straight forward to them. I'll start with a question that is posed to General Schneider and General Uchikura. I read the text that they give me. Do you think that the coalition between Russia, China, and North Korea could constitute a concrete threat to Taiwan and to all the Indo-Pacific area in the next future, and how? Kevin, do you want to try to?
Sir, I will start. First of all, let me just my perceptions of the characterization of the relationship between Russia, China, and North Korea. These are not relationships built on trust. These are completely transactional relationships. It is not what we share. It is not what we enjoy. So I would say that there are limits to those relationships and those interactions. However, to the point about they are opportunists, that if something happens, that if there is a conflict or something involving one of those nations that ties up or focuses the international community, I can see the other two taking advantage of that situation to continue to move to solidify some of their longer range goals and objectives. And it's just one that we will have to continue to keep our eye on. And I don't necessarily have a timeline or believe that there's a timeline for any crisis per se, but to your point that you made earlier, I do worry about the potential for rapid escalation. The picture that I showed of the Chinese Coast Guard vessel ramming a Philippine Coast Guard vessel, if that ship had sunk, or we had run two airplanes together, or something else had happened, I could see us quickly, as an international community, being on a very steep escalation ramp that could drive us potentially to conflict or to the verge of conflict. So again, the importance of deterrence, the importance of showing strength, the importance of being ready at 24/7, 365 cannot be overstated, and that is for all of us to bear that burden. Let me defer to General Uchikura for his thoughts.
Uchi, do you want to expand a little?
Thank you very much for asking such a difficult question. Well, my assessment is that every single nation, such as China, Russia, North Korea, has a different value regarding the Taiwan and also Taiwan Strait. So it is very difficult to predict when, how they can give a threat to such a particular places, location. But first thing I'd like to emphasize is that basically this is a issue between mainland China and Taiwan. Also, but in order to support China in the event of Taiwan crisis, maybe Russia could support, North Korea could support in a different geographic area, which does not allow US forces concentrate on particular theater of operation. So that's the most thinkable scenario. That's my my own assessment.
Thank you.
Do I answer your question? Okay.
Understood. Thank you. Very clear. I think this goes to our Marshal Stringer. The question is, can you expand on political agreements on missile interception over different allied nations in NATO?
Yeah, and while I'm at it, I'll tell everybody NATO's battle plans.
And you don't have 1 hour to answer.
No, I can't go into specifics. But of course, one of the strengths of NATO, picking up actually a couple of points just made, is the alliance of 32 nations and the fact that we share information, we share capability, we share the willingness and the resolve. And therefore, actually, in terms of how we then orchestrate forces to protect Europe, there is the inter-reliance, back to trust, the inter-reliance within nations. But what I would say, coming back to my kind of first comment, my worry, but I would take it more broadly, frankly, than IAMD, picks a bit up on what Luca was just saying, is we didn't just physically disinvest under those two long shadows, we kind of conceptually disinvested, right back to the point of thinking, hey, you know, it's the end of history, liberal democracy has prevailed, we don't have to worry about things anymore. We don't have to worry about escalation dynamics, etc., etc. And of course, we've been rudely awakened from that, specifically since the 24th of February 2022. So in terms of what we buy, where we posture it, and really important, back to Luca's question, which I think might have been, frankly, the most important question today, which is making sure that our forces and our airmen and women, and our sailors and our soldiers, know that they have the permissions and the authorities to operate at the pace they need, and that they can move at the agility that they need. And the reason they'll be able to do that is back to the fact that our strategic thinking has got back in the right place. Our operational thinking that connects it to our tactics is as match fit across peace, crisis, and conflict as it can possibly be. And that actually they will have the freedoms to employ as they would need to. Those are the things you can discuss at 1G, very pleasant, air-conditioned comfort in meetings like this. They're not the things you want to do in the heat of a fight.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnny. I think the next question goes to Justin. I try to expand a little bit. The question is to us, what do we think a transition from academic to operational training in modern Air Force should prioritize?
So I will split it in terms of where I think the priority should be in terms of live training versus synthetic training. You clearly need a mix of both. I think one of the key questions just up front is a really thorough and honest cost-neutral assessment, so not looking at cost, of what can you reliably simulate and what can you not. So for example, if you are concerned with IAMD, particularly the air component of IAMD, so air-based interception of cruise missiles, which in the case of the UK or Canada or a bunch of other countries that look north as well as east, might well happen over water or ice at night in really bad weather, certainly likely to be at night. Modern simulators, however good they are, simply cannot simulate the lighting and visual conditions that you have to deal with when you're trying to look down at low level for small things on a radar scope or visually over the sea. And so some of that, if you're going to be good at it, will have to be done live. And doing that live means actually not just going out and allocating a couple of task lines in your monthly training or your 6-monthly training cycle for your crews, because to do that live, they have to all be current and certified in bad weather, low-level flying over water at night, which actually takes quite a lot of work up. So if that's one of, for example, your Air Force's core missions, you're going to have to concentrate quite a lot of live flying hours to get to that point. And I think it's something we need to look at. Equally, if it's how do you sequence beyond visual range support to a SEAD package with significant electronic attack, both that your forces are employing ECM plus adversary, you're going to have to do that in the sim. Because we can't simulate the emitters in real life, and even if we could, we wouldn't want to give the adversary that collect. And the only place you could possibly do it with the ranges is probably the J-Park. In Alaska, going out there is expensive. So it depends on what missions your Air Force is likely to have to do in war, and whether you think you can do all or most of your high-end tactical training in the sim realistically or not. And if the answer is no, which it probably is for most mission sets, then try and work backwards from there. What do I need to practice live, and what other conditions do I need to put in place to get to the point where I can do that regularly across my force? And that might be a case of also having to move back to larger squadrons for a lot of air forces that have moved to small squadrons to make the form cycle easier to manage with constant small-scale deployments overseas. But it makes it difficult if one of the things you want to practice is regularly 4-ship tactics live, because if you're a squadron of, say, 8 or 9 aeroplanes regularly, then that 4-ship is a max effort. And if one falls out, then your whole sequence is gone. So yeah, I would start with, what are your mission critical requirements for each unit or each force in war for your country? How do you fit into the NATO defense plans, and work back from there?
Excellent. And let me expand. If we project ourselves 10 years, and we have our GCAP pilot going through his conversion unit, do you have numbers of percentage between live and virtual training?
I mean, one thing I would say is really interesting looking at particularly 5th-gen pilots in the Indo-Pacific, looking at the Chinese air threat, which includes quite a lot of 5th-gen and will include 6th-gen and a lot of uncrewed, is that actually a lot of the pilot training requirements, particularly in terms of how you train people who will be fed into those 5th-gen units, are almost back to the future. Because one of the weird things, if you're flying a lot of 5th-gen, particularly in an air-to-air role, is you're going to end up in the merge quite often. So you're actually going to be going into BFM quite a lot, so that's dogfighting. Because you don't have that many missiles, you can see a lot more than you can kill, and you don't tend to crank, tactically speaking, like a 4th-gen does, where you try and keep the range up until you have no choice. Instead, you're kind of living in the weapons engagement zone. And so actually part of your training requirements for a high-end, penetrating, capable, stealthy 6th or 5th-gen fighter is probably quite a bit of BFM. And that involves training people in things that can pull 9G and hold it, or at least 7, to give people that ability to work in that environment and get used to it quickly. It might mean splitting squadrons, actually, because it's going to be very expensive to fly things like GCAP or F-47. They're probably not going to be quite the same size, but based on some of the requirements that have been pushed on GCAP, it's going to be pretty big. And pretty big and stealthy means very expensive to operate live. So you may want some sort of surrogate at the squadron level where you can go and live fly in some of those, should we say, more basic skills, where what you're training is an ability to maintain SA and focus under high G in conditions where disorientation is a big thing and you can't simulate that.
Thank you, Justin. Excellent. We have a question for General Goretti. I'll hit on you. Do you think that current defense budget trends in NATO members and partners are sufficient for the level of ambition of advanced air forces?
Of course not.
Okay. Okay, so we can go to lunch.
No, actually, I'm a financial officer, and you know that normally it's not a matter of money. You know, it's just a matter of decision, where to put the money. And then if you need something very urgent, you take something from another place and bring the money when you need. But I think this is important. It's not the money, the budget you allocated, but the commonality of all of us in relation to the capacity we do have. And the other point very important is the mutual trust. If you want to all have the same capacity, maybe we duplicate the efforts. Well, maybe someone cannot have the fighters, for instance. I just increased the thinking. You know, I might decide to have also only the combat support aircraft taking out all the fighters. I need to rely on someone else to protect me just in case. I don't think we are ready for this. I don't think we're not ready for this. We can have money. We can have dollars, euros, but I think it's a cultural problem. We need to be ready on the mutual trust arena to decide which kind of weapons we do need in order to compensate the losses and the weak points. But the budgets is related to the cost of the equipments. And the other thing is, again, another cultural problems. One thing I learned during 3 years of war in Ukraine, that the Russians, they were able to double up the inventory of the weapons.
Stocks.
In the Western side, the only thing we got, we double up the price of a single missile. That's something to note. I don't think that it's good to hear this. And this is a message for the industries. If you double up the price of the missiles and the weapons, you kill ourselves. Thank you.
Stocks. So. Yeah, I was saying stocks, resilience, capability of, of having DOBs enough to counter our threat. We have time for one last question that is open to the panel and is kind of large. Is, do hypersonic weapon system pose a new dilemma to our deterrence policies? Who want to try to answer this? Justin? We can go through.
So one thing I would start with is that hypersonic weapons aren't new. ICBMs are hypersonic, and we've had to deal with them in deterrence since the late 1950s, early 1960s. So in terms of hypersonic, I would split it into two different categories. One is warning time, which is one set of problems, and the other is platform survivability for key platforms or nodes like carriers or KOCs. I think in terms of warning time, yes, they do pose some problems, but for the most part, at least for now, things like Kinjal, the air-launched quasi-ballistic, quasi-hypersonic Russian weapon, or more reliably Zircon, for example, that they fire off submarines. There's a bunch of Chinese hypersonic systems, the F-17, for example, being one of the more threatening. It's land-based. Most of them have some indicators and warnings likely built in because these are quite large, quite specialized platforms and systems that are operated by specialist units. And so going back to the increasing transparency in some ways of the global space, indicators and warnings are likely to be there of prep. But of course, if your decision time revolves around only starting to take a decision when you detect a launch, you have a problem. So I think a new relationship with perhaps some of the indicators and warnings side of things that traditionally sits with intelligence services and strategic level intelligence services need to be brought in, particularly in non-US countries, more closely into the military planning cycle, and that will involve a different approach to information. For platform survivability, there are some ways to intercept some hypersonic systems. I mean, even Patriot has been able to intercept occasionally Kinjal in some circumstances. I think the blunt truth is that for most of these systems, unless you have a US Navy carrier group with the most lethal, dense, multi-layered air defense shield that has ever been put on this earth, and even there they're going to worry, most of these hypersonic systems are probably going to get through, just by dint of the fact that we have, even in Europe, a lot of territory to protect with a lot of potential targets that we're worried about, from CNI through bases, through KOCs, through whatever. Frankly, we're probably going to have to assume that at least a lot of those get through, and therefore look at it as a targeting problem that we need to impose on the adversary. They can't have a vast number of these things because they're very expensive. And so can we reduce the likely damage that they feel they are likely to achieve by getting at least a significant proportion through below a level where they think it's worth the risk of relying on that capability as either a first strike or a critical battle-winning capability? If we think about our own approach to Russia, for example, until recently, one of our biggest problems for the high end was not a lack of ability to strike key targets. It was a lack of ability to strike sufficient numbers of key targets with the weapons and inventory we have. So let's look at the adversary's problem set in that way, where again, Russia at the moment is a very different beast to China, just by dint of the fact that they've been cranking out high-end missiles from ballistic through cruise at just an insane rate and not using any of them for a decade plus.
Thank you, Justin. Johnny, do you want to sweat?
Thanks. Well, I'd add to that. First off, real complexity comes not just from dealing with the hypersonic threat, it's an adversary who layers a bunch of things together, of which hypersonics are one, which is why coherence between ballistic missile defense and integrated air and missile defense, by which a number of people have previously thought the air-breathing threats only, is essential, because then you start buying the right things. So that's the first point. The second point I'd make is this underlines why even in, especially actually in a defensive, only ever second mover advantage alliance like NATO, the roots of a really good defense are a really good offense when it's required. And for a lot of these systems, why are you waiting for them to come at you when you have the opportunity to go after them at source? So you deal with your problem to an extent that you can left of launch.
Thank you. So unfortunately, the time is running out, and we have to move on with the program of the conference. So I would like, first of all, to thank you all for your attendance. I have to say your attention is really great. But mainly, if you agree with me, I would like to propose a great round of applause to our exceptional panelists today. Really, thank you all, and all the best to all of you. Thanks.